that Dr. Sargent I see in there?
Good morning, Dr. Karp. Yes, it is Dr. Sargent.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I know what a relief that was.
It's a complete relief. You know, I'm still working on my dissertation, though. I have to just make a couple of edits before I send it off for publication.
Right.
But what I do have, they loved it, and they let me walk out with it. So
that's awesome. And now you're kind of going, what do I do with my time?
oh, believe me, I have no lack of activities for my time. I'm now catching up on all the stuff I've put off since I was in the middle of all that. So.
Oh, wow. Well, congratulations. I know it's, how many years did it take?
3 years.
That's not bad.
No, they don't let us dilly-dally.
Yeah.
The program, the dissertation is broken up across the program. So you have to complete certain sections of it as you go along. So there's nobody leaves unfinished, you know. So that's good.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's a lot of work.
I hear you.
You know.
Yes.
But thank you.
You're welcome.
Everyone will be starting in 2 minutes.
Should I go ahead and share my screen?
Yes, please. Let me know
Okay.
problems.
And so this is the boiler, you know, half of it, try to swing you like
We are at 8:30 and participants are growing. I don't know if you guys want to wait a minute or two, or if you want me to get going on this for you folks.
I think we can wait a couple of minutes if that's okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
I think that's a good idea. I'm going to get a refill of water real quickly.
Just a second while I troubleshoot a person who's having issues connecting. Good morning. If you find that I have muted you, it's just to let the speakers have their time. If you have questions during the meeting, please put them in the chat, and I'm sure there'll be question and answer at the end as well. Good morning and welcome to the session, Setting Up Students for Success. I believe Christina Wray is starting it off, or Peggy. You'll find that out in a second. So Christina Wray, Peggy Nuhn, Carissa Baker, and Katherine Urquhart from University of Central Florida and Lake-Sumter State College will be presenting today. And have at it, folks.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christina Wray, and I'm the Digital Learning and Engagement Librarian at UCF. And my colleagues, Mrs. Peggy Nuhn, the UCF Connect Librarian at Seminole State Lake Mary, Dr. Carissa Baker from Rosen College at UCF, and Dr. Katherine Urquhart from the Psychology Department here at Lake-Sumter, who also adjuncts for the School of Nursing at UCF, are excited to help you kick off your day focused on information literacy and student success. Our presentation will look at information literacy skills from 3 different perspectives. We'll look at how the students experience it, librarians, and disciplined faculty. And we'll demonstrate how librarians and disciplined faculty can work together to support student success. So let's get started. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat as we go along, and we will do a big question and answer session at the end and cover all the questions that are asked during the session. So when students start college or transfer to a new school, how developed their information literacy skills are will greatly impact that experience, especially if the expectations are different at their new institution than they were in their previous learning environment. Each new environment has what's known as a hidden curriculum. These are the skills and information you need to successfully navigate the system and achieve your goals. Unfortunately, these skills are rarely explicitly taught, and often there is this expectation that students will already know this information before they come to their new institution. The problem is that because it is assumed that they have learned it elsewhere, these skills are rarely explicitly taught as part of their curriculum. And this especially impacts first generation and non-traditional students. Fundamentally, most of these skills are either implicitly or explicitly related to information literacy. In the summer of 2018, UCF Libraries surveyed students, and we found that students were least confident about their ability to manage their time, their stress, and cite sources successfully in their assignments. They also felt overwhelmed by their coursework and really didn't know how to begin research projects. And as they were working, they struggled to find appropriate sources. And each of these things also directly impacted time and stress management. Further, they struggled with keeping up with their assigned work, as well as feeling that they could effectively study for their exams. And they didn't feel confident about presenting in class. Much of the instruction work that librarian faculty collaborate with disciplined faculty on is focused on improving the very skills which will result in lower cognitive loads for students, improved research output, and a better understanding of how scholarly communication works. Academic librarians frequently utilize the information literacy framework, which was developed by the Association of College and Research Libraries to focus our information literacy instruction. And as part of this framework, there are 6 frames. Authority is constructed and contextual. Information creation as a process. Information has value. Research as inquiry. Scholarship as conversation. And searching as strategic exploration. I'm going to go ahead and pull up that site. And after I'm done talking, I'll put the link to their site in the chat so everyone can easily access it. Each of these frames is designed in such a way that as learners gain better understanding, there are clear indications of where they are on their skill building path based on their behaviors. These indicators are divided into knowledge practices and dispositions. And for instance, I went to the scholarship as conversation section frame, and say if I wanted to get a feel for how a student understood that scholarship is an ongoing conversation, I would look for things like, are they citing the work of others in their own knowledge production? Do they seek out ways to contribute to the conversation at appropriate levels? So for an undergraduate or even a high school student, this may be as straightforward as they actively engage in the course discussion boards without really being forced to do it. And that how nuanced their discussions are, and are they bringing in things from outside sources, things like that. So are they actually participating in the conversation, and is there a give and take? I might also look for things like, do they recognize that a journal article is only part of the conversation, that it's not the final end of a conversation, right? So, and do they see themselves as contributors to scholarship? Do they identify themselves as part of this community and part of the conversation? So these frameworks allow instructors to build opportunities into coursework to help learners move through these threshold moments to become more skilled in each of these areas. Let me go ahead and copy this link real quick, and I'll put it in the chat. Okay. And now I am going to turn things over to my colleague, Mrs. Peggy Nuhn, who will explore the ways in which librarians and discipline faculties can collaborate to bridge the needs of students and instructors.
Thank you, Christina. So let's consider how librarians can serve as a bridge between students and discipline faculty and what that can result in. Christina touched on things students struggle with. I'd like to touch on their backgrounds, because in the words of Stephen Covey, we first need to seek to understand. Some basic understandings of college students on a national level include that they are generally first generation, often low income, and they are also holding down a job. In fact, a 2020 report of the American Association of Community Colleges revealed that 21% of full-time students are also employed full-time, and 41% of full-time students are employed part-time. So these students are juggling a lot. Now, this last bullet point, that 80% of new community college students aspire to earn a baccalaureate degree, but only 1 in 5 will transfer and graduate within 6 years of enrolling at a university. This is incredibly important because this gap between the students' aspirational goals and their reality is one we need to try and close. One important way we can close that gap is through collaboration. Collaboration between librarians and discipline faculty at the same institution, as well as collaboration between college faculty and librarians and university faculty and librarians, particularly when we have established relationships, such as our Direct Connect partnership. More on that later. How do we do this? Let's take a look at the next slide.
The next slide seems to have gone off on an adventure.
Uh-oh. It's the one with I-4.
Yep.
There we go. Thank you. So we build a culture of collaboration. We recognize that we, disciplined faculty and faculty librarians, are all on the same roadway, and we're all headed to the same destination. We all want our students to learn and master important concepts, although to some extent, we do drive in different lanes. Librarians respect that disciplined faculty are the content experts, and our expertise lies in knowledge of library resources to support that content. Collaboration allows us to create meaningful, content-rich LibGuides, research guides. Collaboration on assignment design can result in more depth with respect to library resources and prevent students from being underserved because sufficient resources on a particular topic are not available, or students being frustrated because they can't easily fulfill an assignment. For example, when students are permitted to pick a research topic, any topic whatsoever of their choice, but are required to include a peer-reviewed journal article, it may be quite challenging for them to find an appropriate fit. And quite honestly, it's tough for us sometimes to help them with that. And knowing that many college students are low income is an incentive for us to work collaboratively on affordable textbook initiatives, including incorporation of open access resources as appropriate. Through my own collaboration with disciplined faculty, including Dr. Carissa Baker and Dr. Katherine Urquhart, I have been made aware of the amount of material that needs to be covered in a finite number of class days, and it's often a tight fit. Sometimes in that situation, disciplined faculty may understandably say, "Oh, it's okay, I'll cover the library stuff myself," because they're so time crunched. But the library stuff is tailored to your class and your upcoming assignment and incorporates the framework for information literacy for higher education. When librarians come to your classroom, it's not just for a spiel about where the reference books are located and how many times a book can be renewed. It's the librarian's role to know our resources, including databases, covering everything from literary criticisms to a business SWOT report. For those of you who didn't major in business, that's strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We are current on what e-resources may soon be lost due to budget cuts because we weigh in on making those very tough decisions. And we know the newer resources and new features in current e-resources. This is our area of expertise. And I don't exaggerate when I tell you it is in constant motion. If your schedule allows for only one library instruction session in a face-to-face class, facilitate the relationship between your students and librarian by including our contact information on your syllabus and encouraging students to make reference appointments with us. Next slide, please. There are many benefits to disciplined faculty and faculty librarian collaboration. Because librarians do not typically assign course grades, students may speak more candidly with us. If a number of students are struggling with an assignment, we can share that with you. If there's a consistent muddiest point when we assist students working on your assignments, we can pass that along. Remember, in a reference interaction, they talk to us, and sometimes they share a lot. When disciplined faculty and faculty librarians collaborate, we can be prepared for multiple requests for books on a particular topic, and we can expand student horizons on topics for an interesting and effective argument paper. And because genuine collaboration allows for information literacy instruction that has more depth, we are setting our students up for success when they transfer to a university. Typically with Direct Connect, they transfer as a rising junior, but students can transfer at any point in their academic career. Navigating a database and setting up an effective search will be more familiar to them. Any edge we can give them in information literacy competency is a way to minimize transfer shock, because the need to find and use appropriate resources ethically is multidisciplinary. Next slide, please. I'd like to talk a little bit about the transfer situation because we are Direct Connect partners. Perhaps the most impactful collaboration we can have is setting our students up to succeed as future transfer students. Because of our Direct Connect relationship, we are all invested in sending our AA degreed students off to succeed at the university. We've all heard murmurings about college transfer students being, quote, underprepared. But should we blame a student for being unfamiliar with something they've not previously been exposed to? Transfer shock is defined as a drop in GPA in the semester or two immediately following transfer to a university. But I believe that transfer shock is really something deeper. Just as a fever is a measurable indication that something is likely amiss with our health, the GPA drop is a measurable indication of something amiss with that student. This can include financial stresses. Remember, our college students had jobs that may not be sustainable when they transfer. It can involve difficulties navigating a much larger system, perhaps even a campus with multiple libraries, and institutional differences. When there is a gap in knowledge, students will fill that in with how it was done at their previous institution. And this misapplication of previous knowledge often brings disappointing results. For example, they're counting on their financial aid disbursement in a certain time period to buy their books, but it doesn't work that way here. It's a different timetable. To persist in their education, students need to believe that they can succeed. A few too many setbacks will seriously chip away at that. One student described her journey from college to university as an immigrant experience, where she had to learn a new language, a new culture, and without a cohort of peers to support her. How can we work collaboratively to mitigate this? Next slide, please. For one thing, we need to recognize, and research supports, that taken on some, colleges teach differently from universities. Researchers have pointed out that colleges tend to have more multiple choice assessments, that colleges are more self-referenced, where the student compares their work to their previous work on that assignment, and, well, I did better this time, rather than norm-referenced, where the student's work is compared to the work of perhaps 50 other students, and no, I didn't do as well as I'd hoped. Also the general belief that grades are probably inflated at colleges, and overall, there may be less emphasis on writing, which is so essential to university success. Now, these findings are based on research, which may not align perfectly with any one institution or to your community of practice, but these are findings which can definitely contribute to transfer shock. And so, next slide, please. We have the potential for a broader area of collaboration, and that is collaboration between college and university faculty and faculty librarians. Given our Direct Connect partnership often means that UCF faculty and librarians are located on the college campus, we have a unique opportunity for conversation, collaboration, and even some potential curriculum alignment. Going back to the opening address from President Sidor, I am personally not sure there has ever been a time when critical thinking and understanding the contextual nature of authority has ever been more important. And remember that team stands for together everyone achieves more. And when we work collaboratively, I think I probably should go to the next slide. When we work collaboratively, our students are the beneficiaries in the short term. And long term, we all benefit because these students are future employees, they're our future neighbors, and our future colleagues. Their success matters to all of us. Now it's my pleasure to hand the presentation off to Dr. Carissa Baker from UCF's Rosen College of Hospitality Management.
All right, thank you so much, Peggy. There's no way that I can match the calming nature of your voice, so I will do my best here. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about my experiences with students and their challenges, and then one particular strategy that I like to use, and that is library workshops. So first, starting with me, I have a kind of undying passion for theme parks, and probably a good spot for me to be is Orlando, Florida. So, but why do I mention that? I have had a kind of weird path because of this passion for theme parks. So I had 10 years at Seminole State College, taught humanities and English, including Disney classes and Harry Potter classes. So really kind of fun things, as well as the core English courses. But then now I'm at UCF and I'm doing social science work, specifically tourism, hospitality. And then I'm also doing arts work, teaching in the theme park design program. So it's kind of an interesting path. It's not normally the kind of path somebody takes, but one thing it has really taught me is just the interdisciplinary nature of our curriculum now. And so this has been a very useful kind of bit, especially for the work we're doing here with information literacy. And then the other thing I should say is that I am a first-generation college student. And as a first-generation college student, I understand some of the kinds of struggles that people go through. A lot of the things that Peggy mentioned, I certainly had to work. This was all very unfamiliar to me. So I like using that experience to try to help my students. And I'm not sure about Lake-Sumter, but at UCF, 25% of our student population, so 1 in 4 students, is a first generation student. So it's a large percentage of the population, and just being aware of some of the strategies to deal with them and to help them, of course, is really good. So I want to start by looking at some of the observations that I've had. So thank you so much. So I obviously did a big change. I changed disciplines, I changed level, I changed institutions. So obviously when I got to UCF, the students were all going to be pretty much perfect and have perfect writing and just absolutely no issues at all, right? I'm seeing a couple of smiles here. You probably see where I'm going with this. So despite those very large changes I made in my own career path, there was pretty much no difference whatsoever between the students I've taught. I've taught at 2 community colleges as well as a state college, Seminole State College, of course, and 2 universities. And what I have kind of found is that students all have very similar issues. And 2 of the big ones I really want to talk about, writing. Writing is a complex process. Research is a complex process. And I have to say that we don't make it easier for students. So just think about a student, an average student who's taking 4 classes. Each of those 4 classes, maybe they're taking a hard science, a social science, a humanities, something like that. They're taking different disciplines. And each of those classes is going to have different values. It's going to have different emphases, different teaching styles, and different disciplinary conversations, maybe different documentation formats. But then they're taking all of these classes at once, and we kind of expect them to just understand it, right? What, like Christina said, this hidden curriculum. Well, I'm sure they learned this at some point, right? But at some point is probably going to be you. You're the person who should maybe be thinking about these particular issues, and just recognizing again that they're going to take so many different classes at once. And again, with my own interdisciplinary background, I can tell you that even I've been looking at theme parks for about 15 years, but each of those disciplines that addresses theme parks, whether this is the kind of art design side or the humanities side or the business side or the science side, they're all looking at the same subject from a different perspective. And so the writing is different. Even the documentation formats are different. So just kind of having that empathy, understanding those things that students are going through. And then the other thing, which I think maybe I don't think about enough, and maybe you don't either, and that is how inauthentic this writing tends to feel for these students. These students don't feel like they're experts. And I would say I do also teach master's level students, and they don't feel like they're experts. So certainly your freshmen, sophomores, juniors, they're not going to feel like experts in this particular field. And think about where you were when you started off on this path. Did you necessarily understand all these discourses? Did you necessarily have the right scholarly voice? Did you recognize this kind of weird, almost fake audience of this really kind of abstract audience that you're writing to? Maybe not. So these kind of rhetorical strategies that you learn for each discipline, they tend to develop later. And so again, when they're at the beginning of those college careers, it's going to be very difficult. So I wanted to look at some of the common student challenges that I've seen. One of them, of course, just being that students come from a variety of backgrounds. And I can tell you this from firsthand experience. I took honors and AP classes when I was in high school, but we actually never learned documentation. Whereas my husband, who in fact didn't take any of those advanced level classes, he totally knew MLA by the time he was a freshman. So even something as simple as a documentation style, you're going to have students coming from different backgrounds. The next thing that tends to be especially an issue at Rosen College, so I should let you know if you don't know about the Rosen College of Hospitality Management, all of our students work. So it's required for them to do at least 3 internships. So this is very much a working student population. And so they kind of feel frustration at assignments that don't connect to the real world or to their experience or their passions or things like that. So that is something that they do face. Talking about, again, the first generation students, but also other students as well. I think graduate students as well feel this, and that is imposter syndrome. And this is this kind of internal struggle that you might go through. I don't know if I really belong here. And honestly, when I look at these really almost, I'm going to say, alienating assignments that seem very theoretical or that don't seem to connect to my life, maybe I'm going to keep questioning, do I really belong in this setting? I'm just not so sure, because this is all kind of strange land to me. I liked what Peggy said about kind of almost, this is a new language, right? So I'm learning a new language. Next is the time crunch. And I don't know how many of you dealt with this when you were in college, but I am absolutely in this boat. So first gen college student, I worked 60 hours per week when I was in community college. And then when I transferred to the university, I had 5 classes every single term because I really wanted to get through. And I had family commitments and was dealing with helping out my family. So, and this is I hope I don't offend anyone when I say this, but it's really hard to care about all of these assignments and maybe the way that professors or instructors would like you to care about it, because there's just so much going on in your life. So just thinking about that. And then no familiarity with information literacy. What is information literacy? But more than that, what is information? Where do I actually go to find information that is credible? And Peggy, who has done library workshops with me many, many times, can attest to the fact that at least at Seminole State College, we had students who had never been in a library. This was the first time they had stepped foot in a library in their life. And of course, that's not every student, but it was enough to say, yikes, you know, we can't assume that they necessarily have this knowledge. So this is, I think, a good segue to my next slide. And that is for library workshops. So to me, this is a great strategy. And so Christina and Peggy, I think already mentioned this idea of connection, partnership, building a bridge. All of these are great concepts. And one of the best ways to build that bridge to a student is to just force them to go down to the library. And so I did this in every single class and continue to do this in every single class. And this is a formal library instruction. So this is not me saying, hey, if you need sources for my essay, go down to the library. No, this is me physically taking them down to the library. And one of the things that I hear a lot, and that I just heard as well from Peggy, is this notion of time, okay? It is really difficult, and I have found this more difficult with the pandemic because they're now giving me a lot of classes that were fully face-to-face but are now mixed mode. So I'm only getting to go down to campus once per week and things like that. Or maybe you're fully online now because of the pandemic. So there's a lot of issues with this. Time is a big challenge. And so you might hear a faculty member say, well, I just don't have the time for an extra trip or even a field trip. I don't have time for that. And so that's why I like to say, make the library workshop an essential part of the instruction. Make it part of the instruction for the assignment. Don't make it a kind of extra, let's go visit the catalog kind of thing. No, actually make it a part of the assignment. I think this is a, you know, really powerful thing that you can do. And don't bring the students down without preparation. So really, really important, kind of coordinate in advance. And we'll talk a little bit about that later in the best practices. The other thing you want to think about is that you should grade this. So make this a day, and even if you don't grade attendance normally, I would grade attendance for coming to the library. Again, as a really important piece of this research process is doing that. And then when you do that coordination with the librarian, you just want to think in advance, do you want explicit or implicit instruction in particular areas of the information literacy framework? So are you going to say, okay, let's talk about these different frames for the framework, and we're going to tell you how the skills you're going to learn today are going to fit in each of these? Or do you not even really want to talk about the framework, but instead you want to weave that in to your instruction and just make sure they're learning those bits of information literacy, maybe in a more implicit way? And I will tell you, for any of you who have not tried this library workshop strategy, students are really often more comfortable with the librarian. They see the librarian as maybe a role model, as a stakeholder in their learning, somebody else that maybe really cares about where they're going, but there isn't the same power differential, right? So the librarian is not going to grade the student. And so it's just this kind of really powerful relationship that they can develop. But I really think it's something that you, as in you, the faculty member, should not be doing these sessions, because it's good for them to see that there's this other person at the institution that is going to help them and be willing to guide them in their learning. So really, I think a very powerful strategy. And now I would like to hand it over to Dr. Katherine Urquhart, and she's going to discuss another really powerful strategy, and that is the embedded librarian.
Thank you, Dr. Baker. Well, my experience, I'll give you a little bit of background about myself. I've taught for Lake-Sumter for 20 years, started teaching in the nursing program and moved over to the psychology program. So I've been there full time, and I teach as an adjunct here and there at UCF, just one course. It's called Nursing Research, NUR 3165. And my experience has been with fully online courses at UCF. So I have always had pretty much the luxury, and I will tell you, it really is a luxury, of having a librarian embedded in your course. It's extremely helpful. So at UCF, librarians, what they do is they connect with professors prior to the beginning of a course, and of course throughout the course, regarding their students' different research needs, and then they customize library instruction accordingly. My course is going to be very different from a hospitality course. So the databases are often featured in these sessions, but if assignments involve finding different types of resources, such as graphics or statistics, then other resources can be incorporated. So the embedded librarian idea involves incorporating library instruction into an online class. And this is having a dedicated librarian embedded into the course. So I've been working with librarians for approximately 7 years at UCF for this one course. And it's a simple yet effective concept. The librarian enters the online discussion forum, opens the discussion by introducing herself and explaining their expected availability and involvement in the class. So then students are free to ask questions, and the librarian responds to the students with generally a positive comment on their topic and any advice that they can give them regarding databases and resources. And the amount of time crafting responses varies. For all of us, really since COVID, we're all in an online situation, teaching online classes, whether you were before or not. That can take a lot of time, especially when students are having trouble locating appropriate research articles. That's an awful lot of time now that I, as the instructor, don't have to spend on that type of skill set. I've got a partner, and I've worked with Andrew Todd at UCF, as well as primarily with Peggy for years. And that is an unbelievable amount of help to me. So basically, not to sound like things are canned at all, we don't do that. But although we do get the same questions again and again and again about APA style and formatting when the students have questions about that. So of course we've got some little, I guess, copy and paste responses that you can then customize to the individual student. So basically those kinds of things, frequently asked questions, the librarian has a lot of answers to those that they've compiled over multiple semesters. So answering students' questions within these forums is just one of the services. The librarian also posts tips about how to narrow down topic ideas, how to choose and utilize library databases, and also incorporates information for the students that they find helpful on APA style and formatting. So as a distributed campus, UCF has sites all across the state of Florida, and historically they faced some real challenges when it came to serving all of those campuses with the growing number of online students with only a handful of librarians. So this embedded librarian program demonstrates how through this partnership approach, it really is a partnership, it's a team, between the faculty and the librarian, that it makes a huge difference. The morphing of this model into library course sites for specific curricular areas, and they're quite different, obviously, demonstrates how this community portal can remedy the restrictions of growth of an institution, and it helps foster a sense of community among the students. Now, we've, of course, faced some challenges in spite of the growth of this new feature, newish feature, I guess, the librarian feature. And it's very popular and it's very successful. We've had some challenges along the way with respect to things like defining the librarian's role and deciding how he or she should be involved in the course. Now, the benefits, given the continued growth of online programs, we don't see that going anywhere, and the need to focus on incorporating information literacy into our classroom instruction, UCF's approaches to library instruction can benefit many, not just the students, it really does benefit the instructor. So the most important lesson to be learned is to innovate, cooperate, and experiment. Things don't always run smoothly the first time we've tried them, but I think we now have a pretty well-oiled machine. Peggy and I do, and it runs extremely smoothly. So when librarians and faculty work together and we have a team approach, and we trust each other, and there's definitely openness. We have a united approach too as well, because what's interesting is sometimes the students want to pit us against each other, perhaps. There's as if we're parents, they'll talk to one and not the other. And what they know is when they do that, Peggy and I both do this. We CC each other on any emails from the students so that even if we weren't involved initially, so that the student sees, oh, they talk. They need to see that. They need to see that the librarian is not just a satellite person out there, that we are a team and that we talk all the time, and that we're a united front, and that we're there to help them, of course. So these lessons can positively affect the way that we serve our students. And I'm going to hand it back to Christina Wray for some best practices.
So I'm going to talk about best practices from the student perspective. One thing that we can do to help them is to explicitly identify our expectations and scaffold the impact on grades for hidden curriculum skills. So that, say, the first assignment, if they're not citing appropriately or they're not really conforming to conventions, that they don't have this really negative grade right out of the gate, and then the rest of the semester is trying to start getting caught up. So if it doesn't impact their grade so much, but they get the information that they're lacking skills in these areas, then they can start to think about it in a more holistic way. The next thing is to really inform students when we recognize that there are patterns of knowledge gaps occurring in their work. Students don't know what they don't know, right? And especially since many of these skills are never implicitly taught, they don't really understand when they aren't meeting expectations, or even when there's a problem sometimes. Much of my work is working with students who have been sanctioned for plagiarism, and I have one-on-one sessions with them, and for many of them, it fundamentally came down to they genuinely did not understand how they were supposed to do something or why it was important. And then finally, making sure that we provide skill building resources that can be utilized outside of the classroom. There's rarely space in our curriculums to add in the type of work that someone would need to build these skills. But if they don't have an easy way to go and find resources to build those skills, it never happens. So generally, across the board, for the best student experience, we have to be really explicit about where they aren't conforming to our expectations and give them the time and space to build those skills outside of the classroom before it begins affecting their grades. And now I'm going to hand it over to Peggy to talk about the partnership best practices.
Thank you, Christina. So it comes down to understanding our students and seeking to understand their needs. First generation students, and something that I wanted to mention with respect to first generation students, families are often incredibly proud that their son or daughter or brother or sister is going to college. But because it is first generation, they are not necessarily able to provide informed support. If it gets too hard, they say, oh, quit then. They may have unrealistic expectations for whether that student can still have the family dinners and the family outings or be available to babysit younger sibs on a moment's notice. So that informed support, even though they are very proud of them, may not be there. And also our students are often employed, and first generation and college students are an incredibly diverse group. And so we need to be aware of and sensitive to that. And then with respect to our collaboration, communicate, share, that builds an atmosphere of trust. And we can collaborate to build meaningful opportunities for students to acquire information literacy competencies. Because again, team, together, everyone achieves more. So we can do this together. And as Katherine mentioned, we have each other's backs. We don't let students online divide and conquer. We include each other in communication. And it's a really wonderful working relationship to have, and I value it. And then also, we want to prepare students when we know that we are located at an established feeder school, whether that's Direct Connect or one of the many other pathways. The state of Florida has a statewide articulation agreement for transfer to facilitate transfer. So anticipate that they probably will be moving around and prepare them for success and collaborate when there are established pathways with the faculty and librarians at those institutions to make the transition more seamless. And now I will pass this on to Carissa Baker.
All right, thank you so much. So it seems like of everything we've talked about today that the library workshop might sound like the easiest one, right? You just bring your students down, you tell the librarian to tell them some stuff. But actually what I found is that the more pre-work that you put into this, the stronger this library workshop is going to be. So it's all about partnership, all about collaboration. So first of all, what is the purpose of the visit? Is it just to enjoy the beautiful books on the stacks or something? Or is there a very specific thing that you need to talk about? Say you're working on a research paper, you want them to know the process of research. What are the exact outcomes that you want? So you probably do student learning outcomes when you develop classes and programs. Make some SLOs for this particular visit. What is it you really need those students to understand? So is this all about just learning how to navigate the catalog? Is this about finding databases? I could tell you this, you have never heard of a database, the average student, right? It is just not something that you learn even most of the time in high school. So is it about navigating the databases? Is it about how to do a good keyword search? Is it about going into specific journals that work for that particular discipline? Is it about how to read a journal article? Here's where the abstract is. Here's how to cite that particular journal article. So there's a lot of different purposes and outcomes that you might consider for your particular visit. And that's something you want to work with that librarian on. And the best thing that you can do is to provide the librarian with information. Okay. They want to see your syllabus. They definitely want to see the assignment that you're working on. And they need to know those specific requirements for your instruction. And so a couple of examples. You obviously all heard from me doing this disciplinary shift. I used MLA for pretty much 14 years straight, and now I use nothing but APA because I changed disciplines. Again, the student not necessarily going to know what's the appropriate documentation format for each discipline. So make sure the librarian knows so that they can instruct accordingly. And then also very important if you have disallowed types of sources. So I'm not sure how common this is in other disciplines, but when I was teaching literature, this was quite common. You would have many literature professors who wouldn't want you using, let's say, a journal article that was 20 years old. They wanted something more current, or they didn't want you to use master plots, for instance, which is kind of this summary, a book summary kind of thing. So what are these particular things that you need done or that you don't need done? Because the more information you give the librarian, the more effective they can be, the more they can customize this instruction to your specific student needs. So really, really important. The worst thing you could do is not do this. And then let's say Peggy, who's done many, many library instructions for me, I don't tell anything to Peggy in advance. She goes over the catalog. We get to the end of the session and I say, I don't allow books and ebooks. I only allow peer-reviewed journal articles. Sorry, I know you kind of wasted 20 minutes right there, right? So the more they know, the more they can help you. The other thing is that bit about contact information. Everybody has mentioned this so far in our presentation. The librarian provides the contact information so that the students, again, see them as this kind of partner in their learning. And if you could go to the next slide. And then can you go beyond just bringing them down for this one session? And I would say yes. How do you maximize this library instruction? And I would say the first thing you could do, something Peggy and I have done to great effect, and that is survey students ahead of time about concept familiarity. So maybe you have a pretty good idea of what you would like the librarian to cover, but you don't necessarily know what your students have gone through. And I can tell you there was one semester where Peggy and I did this pre-survey. You know, do you know how to get into the library catalog? Are you familiar with databases? How do you read an abstract? Whatever. What are these kinds of concepts that they might need? We had one class that I was teaching, let's just call it the 9 o'clock class, and they had all been to the library the last semester. They already knew this. We get to the next class, let's just call it the 1030 class. There were 2 students who had entered the Seminole State College library in the past. So you may find that students at the same level are going to have really, really different experiences. So helping the librarian gauge exactly what they need to cover is a really good idea. And then even better is pair this with a post survey. Okay, so we went to the library, and what actually was determined from this? Do you feel that you're more comfortable with information literacy? Do you feel that maybe you know how to find a source that you didn't necessarily know how to find? Maybe even better, you figured out that journals often give you the citation and you don't have to construct it yourself, right? So maybe you learned something really important. And then taking a look at this kind of globally with both faculty members, the librarian faculty, the disciplinary faculty member, did we actually accomplish those student learning outcomes that we set out to accomplish? Did we actually do that? And then what you can do is now realize you've just become research partners, not just teaching partners, but research partners. And you can use that data to make your next sessions even better. So really good. And then talking about this idea, the second point here, librarians are the absolute experts on the library. And the more that a librarian can tell that disciplinary faculty, the better. So I've seen faculty do this, or librarians do this through emails and through newsletters and things like that. What's new at the library? Is there a new set of LibGuides that was created? Are there new journals that we're now subscribed to that maybe we weren't subscribed to? The disciplinary faculty is not going to be able to keep up with that. So just kind of, again, just giving us the information. And then finally, a really easy but very valuable bit of communication advice. And that is, say you've done a library workshop and a student goes down to the library later on, okay? Peggy has done this for me so many times, and it's very, very useful. Peggy just sends me an email. It's not a big formal thing. It's just, hey, Dr. Baker, I just talked to Kyle for 30 minutes. We found 5 sources for that research paper in this journal. Very, very simple. But what it does is it gives me an update, and it gives me kind of this more well-rounded view about where my particular student's at. And then when I get to the end of the course, if I might have a particular issue with this student, I could say, hey, but I know you went to the library. What else can I do to help you really understand this assignment? So communication. It's all about this partnership communication. And I can promise you, because here I am years and years later with Peggy, and I'm sure Katherine will agree with me. We've both worked with Peggy for so long. You can really develop valuable partnerships that end up just being helpful in all areas of your career. So speaking of Katherine, I'm going to hand it off to her to give you the best practices for embedded librarians.
Thank you. And I just want to, again, underscore the importance of the partnership. And just as Carissa was mentioning, Peggy will do the same thing with my students. She'll inform me, just a quick little email, hey, this happened. And then the next time I talk to the student, I'll say, oh yeah, I understand that Peggy was helping you find some articles on this or that. It's kind of interesting because I noticed that the students seem surprised when to know that we connect that much, that we would have discussed them, or just something as simple as looking up articles. But that gives the students the sense that they are in an environment where they're being considered and thought about and cared about, if you will, where it's not just a very sterile online class. So embedding the librarian in an online class, well, thanks to a lot of experimentation over the years by the librarians and by the participating faculty, we found that it works best when the librarian works with students on specific research-based assignments. And when the librarian's embedded in a course that lacks an explicit research component, the librarian services go completely untapped. You can tell them, please make sure you contact the UCF librarian. They won't do it, really, has been our experience. They're much more engaged with librarians when it is embedded in the assignment. We also have something called the Ask the Librarian feature that is built into specific assignments, and they're more likely to use that librarian service again if you've got that type of a feature. So faculty members can basically emphasize to students the importance of asking the librarian for all the reasons that we've already mentioned. The librarians are the expert on databases. So really, to use that Ask the Librarian forum, we set it up in a discussion board. Students can post questions in that forum. And it's not as if I wouldn't potentially answer one in there as well. They see that we share that as well, but customarily Peggy covers all of that. So what we have found is having a single forum rather than multiple Ask the Librarian forums scattered throughout the course in different spots. Having it in a central location makes it easier for the librarian or even myself to check that for student questions rather than having it in multiple places. Next slide, please. Thanks. Oh, and one more thing just before we get to the questions. I will say that years ago, I guess it was about 7 years ago when I first started teaching this one course in nursing research, it was constructed for me. You know, I'm an adjunct instructor at UCF, so they would create the shell. And so these assignments were in the shell already. Of course, they've become more refined over the years. But the first thing I thought, to be honest, was, I don't want anybody else in my course. I want to have total control of the whole course. I don't want anybody else in there messing around with grading or anything else. And I felt maybe like I was a little resistant to it, but it's actually, and if you're in that boat and you're not sure and you've not done it before, it's not like that. It is the best resource. And I thought, oh, this is going to generate more work for me. It actually takes such a load of the work off of you. So if you are on the fence about using a librarian, please consider embedding a librarian in your course, and you'll end up having a terrific partnership and even friendship with that person. Thanks. Any questions? You can contact us. Here's our contact information, email addresses. Mine's, of course, the Lake-Sumter email address. And this is my last name. I guess it's too long for email, so it cuts off my part of my last name. So that is correct as it is on the slide.
I know we're running a little close to the end of our time. I know I'm happy to stay if anyone has any questions, and we'll open up the conversation now for questions from the audience. But if you have any questions later, like I said, feel free to email us or contact any of us. We're happy to help. And yes, we'll email the presentation to conference participants. I want to say thanks again for having us today. And
Christina?
Uh-huh.
That's Steve Hughesby from Lake-Sumter State. Just had a general question for folks. What changes do you anticipate in this embedded librarianship under this COVID, not in classrooms? In the past, I've used the library services where I've had one of the librarians come in and talk to a class. So obviously we would have a class of, whatever it is, 30 people in a small setting, but we can't do that at this point. How mechanically is it set up to ask a librarian to efficiently use your time as well as conduct the learning part of it?
I can answer at UCF, we've been doing synchronous Zoom sessions. So we sort of recreate it, and then we use things like Poll Everywhere and different interactive things to help make it more engaging for students and more interactive. We also have a number of things that can be embedded in the courses. Like we have information literacy modules that can be assigned. We also did every week we did a Research Tips Thursdays, which were these 2-minute or less videos that were on specific things like how do you organize papers for, do a lit review matrix, how do you cite sources, how do you what's a technique for paraphrasing, right? So there are these really short things that can be embedded where they fit best throughout the semester into your course. And those are freely available on our Vimeo channel. So if you guys wanted to use them in your courses, if you didn't have something readily available, definitely feel free to do that. So we've just been trying lots of different things to make it work. And then there is also the embedded model, which is a little different than the traditional one-on-one course and how we've tried to recreate that. Yeah, and I'll put a link to the Vimeo channel in the chat.
If Christina, if I can follow up with one thing you said at Rosen College, we also have a thing where we have a LibGuide that the librarian has created for every single course at Rosen. So we have a tourism geography class that I teach. There's a tourism geography LibGuide, and we actually embed that as one of the sidebar panels in each Canvas course. So that's just been another way that we've been able to have interaction with librarian and library sources.
So I put the link to the LibGuide for the Research Tips Tuesday series, and then I'll also put the link to our Vimeo channel. But on that LibGuide, there is an archive where you can access all the videos as well. So this actually started as these long webinars that we pivoted this spring and fall to the Research Tips Thursday, which is the short videos. So right now, I think they're all on the home screen, but they'll be moved over to the archive once we start the sessions for this semester. And so like, here's one on following the research conversation that's 1 minute and 40 seconds long, and it looking at who's been cited and then using Google Scholar to see who has cited your current article, things like that. And I will just.
Carissa, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, this is Sarah from Eastern Florida State. I'm wondering if, so I'm a librarian there. I am wondering if anyone has had, started working with a faculty member and had any resistance to putting an assessment into the class, into the instructor's class. We have a new assessment initiative at EFSC that's starting up this semester. And I'm just wondering if, as was mentioned earlier in this webinar, about whether faculty ever don't want to work with the librarian on getting an assessment in there so that the librarian gets data to report in their assessment work.
Right, Sarah, that's a great question. And I would say I have seen resistance, and I would say that the easiest thing to do is to develop that relationship.
Yeah.
And so I've noticed that, the longer I'm a, discipline faculty, but the longer I know a particular faculty librarian,
Yeah.
the more likely we are to do that kind of collaboration. I have also seen occasionally with adjuncts more of a concern about this because, especially thinking about the time that they're not paid and that they're spending outside of the classroom. So I have seen some resistance, but I've noticed that the longer you have those relationships, you cultivate those relationships, and then you can get some really, really impressive stuff. And as long as it's not compulsory, I think that it's always going to be good. I could see that there'd be resistance from a lot of faculty members if it was required that you put that assessment in.
Yeah, and I think it's heading maybe a little bit more towards that idea that in our ENC 1101 classes and our speech classes, we're supposed to assess. And so then you're right. All librarians can do is ask and develop that relationship and hope that the faculty instructors understand that we need our data as well as they need their data. And I think you're right. Creating the relationship is the way to smooth that out, so that it can happen more easily for both sides, you know. So thank you.
Completely agree. And if I could just say one suggestion as well is really helping disciplinary faculty understand that librarianship is a research activity. It's a scholarship. It has a discourse. And I think a lot of times disciplinary faculty are just unaware of that. And if they realize, you know, you absolutely have the same need for data and research and scholarly pursuits, then I think they'd probably be more open to it.
Yes, that's a great point. Thank you for that.
That is a good point. And I would just, this is Peggy, I would just add on that not all partnerships will happen.
Yeah.
And, you know, not all collaborations will be fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. I had a professor that I loved working with, very personable, very, very nice individual, would stop by and talk. One day he told me how disappointed he was in his students' research papers and what a mess they were. And coming out of Turnitin, you know, they were all marked up. And I said, well, you know, I can help you with that. And he just kind of smiled his little twinkle smile and never, you know, it never happened.
Yeah.
So that's a reality as well.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. I see that as well. And I think you're right. All we can continue to do as librarians is continue to offer, you know, maybe mention another colleague of that instructors that we've worked with and see if they would connect and hear good things. And then I find in the class, in being embedded in particular, it really is just communicate with the instructor to say, what is it you need me to do? Here's an idea. What do you think of that? Now we've tried it. Okay, what did it work? Did it not work? You know, how can we change it up? And that has worked well for me so far. So, yeah.
I think that we as instructors can sell this feature to other instructors.
Yes, very much so.
I didn't know what to think of it at first. I really thought, oh, this sounds like more work for me. Honestly, that's just what I thought.
Yeah.
And now, of course, it's not. It's just, it's such a great feature. It's so helpful to the students and it's so helpful to me.
Yeah.
And you can just, even if that's the way you do it, if you just sell it as, hey, this is going to save you so much time. They're such a fantastic resource. It's going to take something off your plate. That might do the trick.
Yes. And that's actually not something I'd really thought about. The idea of being a partner in that way and helping out. But there was one discussion board I had this last semester where I think the instructor was surprised at how many comments I put in and how many students I interacted with. And she was like, wow, this is awesome. So, and you know, and I always double check to say, is this the kind of work you want from me? Is this what, am I okay? Am I overstepping? You know, let's chat about that to make sure I'm doing what you want. But got really good response from faculty and from the students in the class as well. So that was nice to hear and see.
And maybe this is silly, but just a reminder that we all have the same goals, right? We want to have student success, of course, but also we want students to develop an independence, an ability to kind of do all these things themselves. And so just a reminder, we're all in the same boat. That could be useful as well. Like, hey, all I want is for your students to be successful in your class.
Exactly. Exactly. A really good point to make when you're talking with the instructor at the beginning and then when you're communicating with students in the class as well. And I really like the point about having the instructor sell the librarian's participation in the class to the students. I think that makes a huge difference. Yeah. All right. Thank you all for talking with me. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we're about at the end of our time. Thank you so much, everyone, for the great questions. It was really our pleasure and privilege to be here with you this morning.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Happy New Year and stay safe.
Thank you all for doing the plenary speech. We really appreciate that you guys came and spent this time with us.
Thanks for having us.
Our privilege. Thank Katie for inviting us.
Yes, thank you, Katie.
Too bad you couldn't come in person, but we're so glad to have you.
Thank you. But we had hoped by January that would be possible, right? But
yeah, well, there goes the world.
mm-hmm.
You guys have a great day and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
You too.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.